be doing any dancing. No dancing up there.
Not yet. Maybe later.
Yeah. Okay.
That takes an awful lot to get me dancing.
I do that one.
Y'all going to be talking about the demise of the cable system and the mass move to fiber, right? That was what the genie told me. eBay. They had FCC across the front.
I just realized I might fall asleep. I should probably make sure it doesn't do that. Might get in trouble if I.
I'm more likely to fall asleep than it is.
I'm likely to fall asleep, and I'm up there.
just trying to figure out how to be up with what they do. We do it in waves. All right, everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started. This is the 2020 vision of our industry by the end of this decade, this session. And so we're going to be talking about some forward-thinking ideas. We've got a pretty good panelists here that are going to talk about the perspective of the industry and where it's going. We're going to try to keep everybody around 5 minutes with their panel discussion or their presentation so that we have time for questions and answers afterwards. So we're going to go ahead and start with Pierre from Performant Networks, and he's going to talk about his vision of our industry.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you for coming to this interesting session. We're newcomers to WISPA, so we'll try to make this quick and be able to listen and get to know you a little better. So, go to the next one. Sorry. So we'll get the slides ready. I just put 4 topics for some ideas, things that I believe from our point of view are things that need to be addressed, need to be looked at as we look ahead the next 5, 10, 20 years. We'll be putting together some facts and predictions, things that say, well, do we agree with these or not, because they're kind of fundamental. And then, do we need to think of a new definition of what is a WISP service? And if we agree on some different type of services, is there enough spectrum, really enough megahertz to push data back and forth? And then what do we do on the backhaul side? So next slide, please. So one thing is the users, the people that we are trying to provide services to, are now have these great devices, iPads and the Wii console and the new fancy TV that is internet ready. And for them to connect to the internet is this. You don't care about routes and setting up fancy networks and going through the pain of booting the PC. You have instant connections, instant services. And with that, they just think that they need to be connected all the time at maximum throughput, no data cap, no limitations whatsoever. You want data, you get it, point blank. So what does that do to the network? What does that do to their expectations? Next slide, please. One thing that will remain is Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi has evolved from E, A, G, and Y gig, which is a white space. Wi-Fi is here to stay because as manufacturers look at it, it's the one radio technology that works everywhere. It doesn't work just in the US or in Europe or in parts of the Middle East or whatever. It works everywhere. It's on license. It's cheap to produce. It's cheap to put out new products that are great and easy to use. So what does that do as we look forward? Having Wi-Fi means that people will be a lot more mobile, not just at their house, but also around where they go about. So if you go to the next slide, please. So does that mean that WISP should care about Wi-Fi outside of the premises? Today you put a CP device, and in the home there's Wi-Fi from whatever brand of routers that you installed, and it's their issue. The cell providers, the mobile providers, are looking at Wi-Fi as data offload. Those LTE-capable devices are great, but you blow your data cap in no time. And they're looking at Wi-Fi as what was the enemy now as being the savior of their mobile networks, being able to offload to Wi-Fi whenever you can. Does that apply to WISP when you have lower density of users, where you don't necessarily offer a mobile service per se? And then if you decide to worry about that, is it more than just the hotspot at the local cafe or at the library, and that's it? And if you decide to entertain that, you do it as a wholesale service to the local mobile, the nearby mobile carrier, extending your reach with the cellular traffic that is backhaul Wi-Fi, or you even don't care about the mobile operator and become a pseudo mobile operator because you have at least a notion of domesticity if you don't have pure mobility. So if WISP are interested in offering that kind of services, now you have to manage more than just a CP device. What does that do to the network, the service offering, the kind of infrastructure that will be needed? And then do we have get enough spectrum. I think we have some experts here about white space and license versus non-license, and how do you get more out of what is a very finite resource? I think there are some great things that will need to be addressed before we can think of offering more out of what we have right now. And finally, what happens to the backhaul? Now it's great. We're getting better reach to these subscribers, whether they're residential or business subscribers. How do we take all of that data, all of that 100 megabits per second, and put it on the backhaul where we don't have the luxury of any fiber backhaul necessarily? A lot of it can still be radio based. Now, yes, we have gigabit capable radios, but then how do you make all of that resilient, scalable, and recurrence are not going away? So how do you go about redundancy issues? Do you want routers in that network where you have layers after layers of addressing, or do you flatten the whole thing with Ethernet or MPLS? That's what the big carriers are trying to do. Is that applicable to the WISP market? And ultimately, if you have a backhaul network, you want to utilize as close as possible 100% of that network, especially when you have everything up and running nicely. You don't want idle links. You want to have a solution, a topology, an infrastructure of sort that allows you to reuse 100% of everything that's out there. And then if you have loss of connectivity on the link, the radio goes down, whatever happens, at least you want to be able to route around it, to be able to go around that specific failure and not have too much of a degraded service. But if you put out radio links on there, if you put out other backhaul links, you should be able to take advantage of that and get more bang for the buck. So how should we go about as an industry trying to figure this out? And that's what I just try to set the tones and now. Here's the last one. Sorry about that. So, all right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, WISPA, for the opportunity here. I see some faces in the crowd, but just a little bit of background. My name is Anand Butch, CEO with NetSapiens. We build the end application delivery platform and VoIP soft switches for the industry. When I was asked to be on this panel, I decided to take a slightly different approach and look at it from a perspective of where the industry is going. I think the first set of instructions that came out said it was a decade or two. So, Alex, I'm going to take the creative liberty to push out even some more. So that's the way I look at it. What we're trying to do here as a WISP community, as a what I call a small and medium service provider community, is it's really a matter of what we see we can do to create a vision in the market. And so what we see in terms of some trends that will dictate this and the opportunities that we have in front of them are things like wanting Microsoft-like features but not Microsoft software. The choice, if you will. The user experience of Apple without necessarily having to be fixed to Apple devices. And then the so-called magic of Google without the fear of Google, if you will. So these are the types of the trends that we see. Some of the market opportunities that you see out there, and we primarily focus on what I call the fragmented markets, of which the WISPs are a huge part of. And so once again, from that context, we're seeing a lot of shift in user behavior. I think Pierre mentioned some of the things already. For example, the expectations are converged. It's become very clear. One of the data points I noticed yesterday, that the Giants game was on at the airport when I was coming here. However, I saw about a half a dozen people in and around me watching the debate on a smartphone of some sort. It's very much becoming, the norm, and the quality is fantastic, with 4G, et cetera, et cetera. So you're starting to see that as the norm. One of the other things that we see is IT consultants, bars. These are all opportunities that even the ISPs or the wireless ISPs as a whole can go after. And what we're seeing is that agents are having to evolve. The traditional telecom agents are having to evolve, and just simply selling boxes and connectivity alone is really a dying business. It's a difficult business to be in. Some of the staggering numbers that are out there in terms of projections, hosted virtual desktops, if you will, a big market there, mobile applications, and obviously, since I'm in that industry, one of the things is mobile VoIP is obviously targeted to be a very, very large market also. Next slide. So if you look at today's landscape, right, the fragmented markets, if you will, specifically the markets that we play in as a community, the wireless ISPs, the small markets, we sit on this fragmented service provider space, right? We've got 80% of the broadband user base that is covered by really the big players, all right? The tier ones and the tier twos. There's probably a dozen players that cover this. But if you really look at where everything is going, you look at the productivity, the efficiency, the entertainment-related content products, anything from video like Netflix or social networking, all the way down to very simple things. Even video conferencing is considered, or video telephony, if you will, is considered pretty simple these days. Everybody's using Skype or Google Talk or whatnot. Ultimately, that's all being delivered by some sort of an application platform. And then the bottom layer here is what is relevant in terms of transport. So what the WISPs are building, right, and what we're building as a community is plumbing as an access infrastructure. The question becomes, okay, what can we do with that? What is the competitive edge that we can gain? And I think there's some very, very interesting things going on in the market, some of which you heard at the keynotes early on, some of the movements with respect to USF reform, et cetera, et cetera. So today, that in itself is a $5 billion market. We play in a very, very big market. So that's great, right? I mean, this is a great opportunity that everybody's going after. But what are we trying to talk about? We're talking about, okay, what's going to happen in the future? How can we affect that? So next slide. If you look at the potential adoption of these fragmented services, small service providers, regional operators, very specialized services, there truly is an opportunity to try to push an adoption rate that can be great. The fragmentation of the end user continues, right? If I do a raise of hands here, you can look at the mobile apps that are being used by people, maybe 3 or 4 different mobile apps for the same type of functionality, simply because your end user habits are different from person to person. That's not going to stop, and we can feed into that, right? So as we continue to feed into that, we have a real opportunity to get to 50% adoption of that consumer base, and that's what we should aim for, and we can really make that happen. Now, what does that do if we're able to do that? Next slide. Yeah, so once again, same content, same applications. We start talking about creating an opportunity for application delivery companies, right? Whether you as a WISP are one of the thousands of fragmented service providers that exist in the marketplace and want to go up or facilitate that market, but we as a community, if you will, can very much start diving into that broad end user base. And that's the picture that we can create. Well, what does that allow us to do? Now all of a sudden, once we do it from the end user base and we start going beyond that 20% that we cover, we now start to basically keep the bigger guys honest. So that's something that we can go after. Once again, this is a very ideal picture, but if you look at everything that's happened in the markets, it's something that we can do. So the question is, okay, so how can we do this? So I've seen it ever since I've been in this space. All of the wireless ISPs that are in the space have certain properties, certain characteristics about building their businesses from the grassroots, right? And so to some degree, there are a lot of opportunities out there to exit. There are opportunities out there to get consolidated. But really, the 4 things that we see here are collaborate and cooperate, right? Join forces in principle. And we're seeing that in a lot of the work that WISPA is doing as a whole, to get a voice for the industry when it comes to USF reform and things of that nature. Stay true to ourselves, right? Don't go beyond what you need to do, but certainly push the envelope and be as efficient as possible, right? Stay the course. When you see, this stuff takes time, right? I mean, the work that's been done in DC and whatnot, it just takes time. So stay the course, right? Build your infrastructure, stay the course, get your customers as sticky as possible. So strive for sustainability, right? Don't necessarily overbuild, but understand where that sustainability can come from and can continue to layer sticky resources. Resist the temptation, turn the tables, right? Think big and become the consolidator as opposed to the consolidated, right? And even if you look at exit plays, match the vision of what you're trying to accomplish. Turn threats into opportunities. A lot of opportunities will arise over the next 5, 10 years in the perspective of consolidation that everybody can play into. And the WISP industry as a whole is a business that's built on fundamentals. And those fundamentals, very clear over the last, 5 years in the industry have started to shine. So the stronger you get over time, you can turn that around, use those fundamentals to leverage as much as possible. So, just to put some lighthearted graphics to the picture, it really is a case where, we can democratize communications, and I think that's where we're going. The key is, it is what we make it, right? I mean, it's a function of staying true to ourselves and being able to continue to build more and more smaller, fragmented service providers that specialize on service and providing applications to a specific market. And I'll leave it at that.
And next on the list is Brian Webster.
Good afternoon. Since this is only a 5-minute presentation, I didn't really take time to put together a slide deck, and it's good that I was right behind around and to talk more about intelligence and expansion, broadband market research. Obviously, I'm an RF engineer, do a lot of consulting, but having been so deeply involved in the National Broadband Map and being a GIS and data analyst, it occurs to me that now there's a lot of intelligence out there for anyone doing market optimization and maximizing the investments one has in their networks, understanding where their competition is and where there is opportunities to still go out and expand and work on the application layer type concepts that you were speaking of. Now the National Broadband Map, not only is it proved that WISPs exist and it allows WISP to kind of defend against Connect America Fund, but allows any one of you who want to really dive deep on the information to find out where your competition is, what type of speeds they're offering, the homes passed, and just as importantly, where there's opportunities for you to do market expansion, either with other competition or in areas that may still be low-hanging fruit. As we go farther into the decade, the idea of the low-hanging fruit is going to be a lot more rare. It's important, and in all the studies that I've done, specifically in the state of Illinois, on how the cable and the DSL operators are working, where they built, why they built, and what's successful for private sector investment, it's very obvious that they're not going much farther than they already are without either subsidies or some handout of some sort. They know where the sweet spot is for their operations, the way they do business, their overhead costs, and where they can make money and where they've got to be. They aren't going much farther than that. WISPs are a totally different animal. Most of them run a lean and mean operation. But it's going to get leaner as the farther you push the envelope and any more market expansion you've got. You've either got to be lean to compete in their backyards, or you've got to go out there in areas where your household density is even lower than what you're currently serving or currently have built. So the aspect of where are we going in the next couple of years, it's going to be a much more focused business acumen on intelligent expansion, intelligent use of the existing networks you've got, and making sure that you're really dialed in and got your finger on the pulse of where the margins are, where the margins could be, where you might have to walk away because there's not going to be a profitable business model, and to keep yourself and your businesses healthy. And so I wasn't really going to go into a lot more detail than that, other than to be prepared for a question and answer session. But it's an important but seemingly small element of where we're going to go in the future, because everything's getting leaner and tighter, and you're gonna have to dial in more on where everything is and where can you afford to give up margin and where do you just have to walk away.
Next is going to be Dan Lubar.
Hi, everybody. While Alex is bringing up my presentation, just a quick show of hands. If somebody were to come up to you and ask you if you know what the definition of spectrum policy is, would you say you could, just show of hands, people who think they could handle that spectrum policy, what it is? Quick, a few people. When Alex asked me to participate, I decided I'd just make it a quick commercial about me, and then let's dive right into it from the very top down. Think of this as an analyst briefing. A lot of generalities, and I'm going to do the fire hose thing, but feel free to pepper with questions later. W by training, entrepreneurial. I was involved in a 3650 band standard with 802. I'm now currently an officer and board member of the White Space Alliance, an international trade group that does white space spectrum use and sort of stumps for that. And I've been a WISP operator and owner for over a decade, so let's jump ahead. The reality here is that it doesn't matter what you hear here today, these are the true items here. The future is an undiscovered country, nobody really knows what's going to happen. The playing field is wide open for the second bullet point. The right idea, the right resources, the right timing, you can do some amazing things. And that includes companies our size. I think we can all sort of relate to that by looking at it. The foundations of change for our industry, in my opinion, are these summarized bullet points: spectrum policy and spectrum management. Doesn't matter what regulatory domain you're in, we're talking about, at least today, the US. And then the industry revolution and industry evolution, if you will. And the convergence that was already touched on by my colleagues here. Basically, this is what I'll be covering, and then statements and questions for discussion later. So go ahead. Zip through here. Basically, again, US-centric view. Skip through this. Spectrum policy. Spectrum policy ultimately defines broadband-based economic development, which is where every state in the union is absolutely putting most of its focus these days. You talk to anybody in the state government, and they know that broadband is an important piece. Social equity and opportunity. Broadband is essentially a bridge to information, the information age. People that don't have it, that's a problem. Life and property safety. I think we all understand the Internet of Things concept. And last of all, homeland security with the business of FirstNet coming on. We'll all see more of that. So that's important to sort of put that baseline in place. Spectrum sharing. Ultimately, we spectrum share all the time. Basically, anybody that's using any kind of uniband or ISM band equipment knows that there's a contention for the medium, and we don't call it spectrum sharing, but from a license point of view, it isn't legally that way. The divergence of legal definitions and operational or sort of engineering definitions, pretty interesting. The concept I wanted to pull out of this spectrum sharing thing is everybody's heard about the database mechanism that's associated with the television white space. The database mechanism and those who are database vendors are going to be sort of a gateway to future spectrum sharing capabilities. Basically, it also means, and this is way down the road for our industry, there might be a day when the cost of actually monitoring or managing the commons, the unlicensed bands, might actually be possible. That's so far down the road we can't even talk about it. Spectrum management, the idea that there's a regulator and somebody who basically controls how the rules are made in every country across the planet, it's an important thing to take into account when we talk about the future of things. The tools that are coming into wide use are internet-connected radios, so that, let's face it, so that both the people managing networks and the regulators can understand how that spectrum is being used. That's an interesting and important concept. Registration systems, again, databases are an interesting and important concept to this. And hybrid licensing schemes, where it's not licensed completely, but it's not completely unlicensed. Again, the database is going to enable, or registration systems are going to enable that. And And then coexistence assurance and interference mitigation. At the end of the day, interference is basically the downside of sharing, the downside of any operational wireless network, whether it's licensed or unlicensed. I think everybody that runs networks knows that. Keep going. And I just want to put in a plug for this term. For those of you who haven't seen this, my hat's off to you. It's great that you haven't seen it. That probably means you don't read NPRMs and other stuff from inside the beltway. But ultimately, harmful interference and being able to quantify what harmful interference is, how it affects your network, those are things that once you have databases in play, once you have tools to manage spectrum more effectively, it's going to be huge for our industry and others. Let's just keep going here. And this is the piece that I'll spend a little more time on. You heard the Hotspot 2.0 from my colleague. Let's face it, there is a real convergence going on in the broadband space, not just in fixed wireless. We saw that on the slide that had those layers. And well, the quilt of the broadband ecosystem is we're gonna have to be playing a part of that, whether it's to protect our customers, whether it's to deliver applications to our customers. It almost doesn't matter. The idea is that there's going to be a converged future, and we all have to acknowledge that and accept that. I think the business of the cellular offload is a great example of that. Cellular offload, it wasn't an accident. That is to say, they all knew they were going to, the cellular guys knew they were going to be beaten over the head with data products requirements. They also knew that a lot of infrastructure existed thanks to Wi-Fi and wireline providers to be used. So they went after that resource in a very efficient way. So let's keep going. And what I think is going to happen sort of next as we start to realize these things, the things I've just sort of covered about spectrum and the ability to recognize we're part of an ecosystem, my prediction is we're going to start to see roll-ups again, especially given the success of companies like Ubiquiti. You have a lot of ability to say a lot of our networks are becoming more and more generic or more similar. And the partnerships that are going to emerge out of those roll-ups are partnerships with mobile wireless operators, government sector folks, content companies. They're also going to be part of the partnerships that emerge, and that we have to be ready to understand and embrace in order to get to that future. And then obviously evolving and disruptive forces in the technology itself. We actually, as an industry, done a good job to stay ahead of that. There's just 3 of these. I'm just going to run through the question, and we can come back to them later. But anybody that really likes one of these, feel free to bring it up during the Q&A. Getting spectrum only matters in high-density urban locations. What do people think about that? I mean, in rural locations, there's usually a lot of spectrum. I know there is in TV band stuff. Geography means a lot. So the question is, does spectrum policy and management really matter for rural locations? So go ahead and skip the next one. Question 2, there are locations that are always going to have to be supported if you go ahead and use the traditional business models of the mobile operator or the wireline operators. With convergence, that is becoming a dinosaur, that concept. The WISPs are proven. We WISP know that you can build out an infrastructure without huge subsidies. That's something we've been hammering home at WISPA for a while. The question is, if WISPs really, are WISPs really, if they are part of a larger corporation or you're part of a conglomerate or something, are you still a WISP? You have to be an independent to do that. Is there going to be a day when WISPs exist inside of other big organizations? That's an interesting question. And the last question, and I'll really think about time here. Spectrum policy management and uses evolve, and the spectrum that WISPs use will be shared or even set aside, not too different than cellular operators. Obviously, the terms of how it's used and how it's shared will be probably pretty different. So the question is, fixed wireless industry someday will look like mobile wireless, and will we basically be doing spectrum sharing and have essentially our own band to grow up into and to make sure we can essentially provide broadband services, which is ultimately at a policy level what the United States really wants to do for its citizens, and whether it's in rural or urban markets. And I think that's it. Thank you everybody for your time.
you already saw the second slide. Generally, when I say things, someone disagrees, sometimes violently, and it's just my idea of what is going to happen, and you may not agree. Go ahead and click a couple times there. I think there's going to be fewer WISPs. It's already happening in my area. Some acquisitions going on. And another main point is to be more fiber in your WISP. Lots of guys think it's some sort of foreign thing, but there's a lot of WISPs that are, whether it's they're building fiber to the end user or fiber to their provider, they're getting into doing it themselves. Better collaboration and just talking with the other WISPs, coming to places like this where you work with each other. There's a lot of renegade WISPs out there. Most of them, well, they're all not here because they don't get that sense of community. And they're going to be faced with having to go that way or not. You're going to have to offer more services, more than just internet. Kind of on the renegade WISP thing, be a bit more professional about how you operate. People are going to expect more of you. And you're going to have to, each WISP will be more relevant to a few different things here. We go back and look at that page, if you will here. Yeah, that's fine right there. Fewer WISPs, there's going to be mergers and acquisitions. Reasons for this are someone is going to be better at doing fiber. They'll either know where it is better than you, or they'll build it better than you, or you are that one that does it better. And we're going to need more fiber to supply the bandwidth that your users are going to want. From a marketing aspect for mergers, if you buy a newspaper ad and you cover, depending on your area, you can cover more than what you currently cover, or radio station or TV station. And most WISPs can't do those sorts of larger marketing projects because they don't see the value. When you cover a large physical area, your cost per customer reach goes down. And then coverage. If you have a bank that has 40 or 50 locations, and your WISP serves 5, but AT&T serves all 40, they're going to go with AT&T. They're not going to mess with you. But if you can serve all of their locations, now you're a viable option. So you might be acquired or acquire someone else just to be able to provide that sort of service. If your WISP also, because they just fail, they just outright fail. Many of those failures will be acquired by the others. I'll govern up the subscribers. So that's the important bit. And if you can't compete with the newer mobile and satellite technologies, you've got LTE networks doing 25 megs to the sub. It's not quite the same quality as what your network is, but customers typically don't care about that sort of thing. They see 25 megs on their phone. If you sell them 3 at your house, they're just going to drop your connection. And changing customer demands kind of goes along with what they want for audio service. They want to do Netflix and 6 TVs, and if you can't supply that, they'll go somewhere else. And then regulatory changes in flexibility. As they want is more bandwidth. If you're in a rural area with lots of trees, you can't use the hundreds of megahertz at 5 gig or 5 gig. You need 900. You need white spaces to even get to the customer in the first place. So that's if the government doesn't work with you on that regard, that's what also go away. The fiber is going to come from some of the B-top networks that are built out, the middle mile networks. If it goes from town to town, and you can go to a license link from some point in that town out to your tower, drop the 300 megs down that your customers are going to be wanting. As an revenue for that. But also, building it yourself. Where it's from you to your upstream, from you down to your customer. You may do license out to a rural subdivision or a small rural town, and then do fiber within that town. It doesn't have to be fiber all the way. As far as the expanded services goes, bigger connections, they're going to want more and more, not just residential, but business, 100 meg, 200 meg connections, voice services, video services, off-site backup. Some was talking about cell phones that they're getting involved with now. It's sometimes easier to increase the amount of revenue you get per user by offering more services that they're looking for than to get more people. And as far as the relevance goes, more relevant in your community. Once you're larger, more established, you're not just kind of the hobbyist sitting over there in the corner. If you're able to provide the services that people need, your community is going to come to you for more things. Likewise, the whole industry is being more relevant to the government. A few years ago, we didn't get into the FaceTime with it that we do now. And they're going to give us more attention because we're displaying ourselves in a more prominent fashion. Any questions?
Good afternoon. So my name is Rich Ferrani, and like many of you, I wanted to attend a rodeo event for my whole life and try as hard as I could. I never found a way to expense it. Thank you, WISPAPALOOZA. So I work for a company called TMC, and it's a media company, and maybe we're most famous for Internet Telephony Magazine. It's one of the publications that we put out. Have any of you, thank you, any of you heard of it or subscribed to it or familiar with Internet Telephony Magazine? Okay, so a few hands. Thank you. Back in '97, when that market was beginning to catch on slowly, voice over IP, back then we called it IP telephony, was kind of like this hobbyist toy. And when I announced this magazine, it was actually a Comdex November of '97. I went to all the tech companies saying, hey, we're going to launch this magazine. I almost got laughed out of the show because no one could comprehend that this thing that people were using like ham radio was going to change the world. I didn't. I can't sit here and say I saw what was going to happen in its entirety. Nobody could have. But the reality is that technology was unbelievable in terms of the opportunity and the disruption and the change that it brought to an established industry. I see white spaces as potentially doing the same thing to our market or the WISP market as VoIP did to communications. So having said that, I wanted to show you some of the research that myself and my team has put together in terms of how much momentum there seems to be right now in the white space market. So with that, if you go to the next slide, and you're one ahead. So Wi-Fi and steroids, we use the term super Wi-Fi as do many companies, media companies, to denote white space technology, which is really just the space in between the TV signals that needs to be optimized for use for databases and other technologies. It's not necessarily Wi-Fi, but that is the term that is primarily being used for this technology. So if you could go to the next one. Microsoft, just to show you the wide number of proponents of this technology, Microsoft calls white spaces the greatest improvement in internet access since the advent of Wi-Fi. So I mean, these are unbelievable quotes that I'm going to share with you. The next one, please. $1 billion market similar to the Wi-Fi industry from Business Insider. That's Henry Blodgett's publication online, a Wall Street analyst. Julius Janikowski said the following. I mean, he's a huge proponent, and I see a similar similarity between what happened with this quote and also what happened with Michael Powell's quote when he actually was a big proponent of Vonage back in the 90s to open up the VoIP market. So it's just interesting that the FCC chairs see these new disruptive technologies as something that can really be used for a market. So if you go to the next slide, this is a quote from Carl Ford, who is the program chair for the Wi-Fi, Super Wi-Fi Summit. And you can see he's now pushing towards policy, and that ties in with some of the other things we've heard on this panel, how policy is important and how we need to get to the regulators and explain to them the importance of super Wi-Fi and white spaces and how it could change the wireless market. If you could go to the next slide, please. So in this slide, we see a 200 billion opportunity. So I mean, we see some really big numbers here, and I know that our last presenter talked about the WISP market consolidating. That very well could be true, unless a new technology comes in and disrupts and brings new opportunity. So I don't think we're able to determine exactly what the future of this market is going to look like. But what I can tell you is when you can have an access point that has connectivity for miles and miles and miles, it changes the world that we all live in. I mean, dramatically. It changes the 4G market. Just think about 4G. If your access point could potentially go for 5 miles and have access 5 miles away, it's just unbelievable and fathomable. So a quote from Cisco, not necessarily about white spaces, but just to show you what they think about unlicensed networks. If you can go to the next one, please. Another one from Cisco. Again, a lot of optimism about these unlicensed frequencies. Next one, please. And the slides will be available after if you want to use any of these for your own internal use. Again, more and more positive words here about what's happening in the market. The next one, Microsoft. Once in a lifetime opportunity, ubiquitous wireless broadband for all Americans. So, I don't remember Microsoft saying once in a lifetime opportunity about too many other things. I mean, for them to say that, I just think that it's important for us to absorb. Is that a joke? It must have been something about a tablet, maybe?
Windows ME.
Windows 8?
Windows ME.
Oh, Windows ME. Yeah, we probably could make a list. This is not something that they make. So that, I think, adds a little bit of gravitas to this statement, right? So the next one, some of us may be familiar with this particular bit of news, but it just shows the collaboration, what's happening in the market. And the next one, please. This may be one of the largest numbers I've seen, 100 miles. It's kind of amazing. I mean, many of you are probably are able to transmit dozens of miles or more. I don't know, is anyone going to 100 miles yet with any of their wireless technology? No. 160 miles. Okay. Okay, still impressive. So I mean, it's amazing what's happening in terms of the evolution of broadband, wireless broadband. So I didn't really plan on talking about new financial opportunities, business opportunities, but another market that's experiencing unbelievable growth is the machine-to-machine market. Basically, sensors on everything communicating, providing lots of big data for analysis and crunching, which will aid many business decisions. But super Wi-Fi, white spaces, any kind of wireless is needed for us to be able to access these sensors. So that's a market that you should potentially consider for what you're doing. Farming actually is becoming a big M2M market as well, believe it or not. I've seen recently there was a farming app with cows, how farmers are able to track the sensors in the cows in terms of chewing the cud and the milk and the freshness of the milk. I mean, all these factors that you didn't think were possible to figure out, but from the collar on the cow, they're able to figure out a lot of this stuff, and then use that for big data and use that with big data and to optimize milk production. But I've also seen M2M technology used in farming to determine the optimum amount of water that you would need on your farm for maximum productivity of your farm. And this is especially important in areas that are under some kind of drought watch, where you just don't have infinite amounts of water, so technology comes to the rescue. So two technologies that could play in rural areas that many of you serve. So if we could go to the next one, please. So 2014, big year. I mean, I think every year is really big for white space technology. There's so much happened this year, and it'll continue for a number of years. But I just wanted to share with you the tremendous opportunity I see, and thank you for providing me this forum today.
All right, well, we got to go ahead and pull this back up. This has been some good information. Everybody's kind of talked a little bit about their vision of the future. It's a little overlap with some of these people's vision. Some of them talking about business, where we should be going. Some talking about being strong, keep fighting a good fight. Some talking about new technologies becoming available to make our businesses better, to give us opportunities that we haven't seen before. One thing, we're going to get to questions here in a second. One thing I want everybody to consider here and think about as you leave today is that you're part of an organization, the Wireless ISP Association. This organization and you as members have control over your future in a way that we've never had in the past. I know when I first got started in this business as a small WISP, what was going on in Washington was just whatever, politics. I had no control over it. But, some of the things that we've done, working with Steve, Matt, and Forbes, and the rest of the different committees that go do this, we're actually doing something. We're actually affecting change. So we have control over our future. So that means that you have control over your future. And with that thought, I'm going to open up for questions. Yes?
A couple of you mentioned convergence and that we're going to lose a lot of risks. Are we going to lose a lot of risks because I see us getting stronger, I see more people here, I see more risk because of technology. If we can get 2.5 white space down to ubiquity cost, we can take everybody over. The other thing is, are we going to disappear, or are we going to be able to contract services to cable companies and cell companies and stuff like that, where we can actually bill them per movie? So for instance, if we got a 3 gig movie that a usually downloads, they collect money on that. Why don't we get 50 cents of that?
Can you all hear in the back? All right,
Sorry.
I can hear you fine, but I realize.
Okay, basically what I was saying is that I don't think WISPs are going to disappear. I think that wireless manufacturers are going to get really smart. The 2.5s, the white space guys are going to figure out a way to do the technology at ubiquity costs. This is going to change our spectrum completely. But when we say that WISPs are going to consolidate or go away, I say this is going to help us really grow in the numbers of WISPs in very small areas. And we may become contractors to the cell companies, to the cable companies and that, who aren't really that smart about the way they do their operations. Why don't we just get a chance to subcontract them? And if somebody wants to download a movie from Verizon, they can use our network in our home, and they should pay us a fee, 50 cents per movie. Then I can afford to keep buying more spectrum and offer better services. I'd like to hear what you guys have to say about how can we act as contractors, because these guys don't want Wi-Fi. Their solution is Wi-Fi, because guess what? LTE has just as much limits, 3 gigs to 8 gigs, and they're saturated. It's us that are the saviors, not them. Now, will they, on their cell towers, put white space antennas and then do it? That's the only question I have.
This is Brian Webster. I'll take part of that. In quite a few years, we've been at the WISP internal. We've talked about wholesale agreements, and we talk about offer our services to other providers. And I used to work for Earthlink, and I helped build the Philadelphia Municipal Wi-Fi. And Earthlink tried to build infrastructure and then decided they didn't want to. They're a wholesaler. And my former boss, he's still there, and we talk on occasion. And last year, WISPA and New American Foundation and myself, we did this combined study using a national program map where we showed that WISPs, outside of satellite and cellular, are the only providers for huge portions of the United States. And with that, we were able to calculate the households passed, and I took this concept to Earthlink. And we kind of had a lukewarm conversation about the idea of creating a wholesale program. For any of you who have been around wireless long enough and realize where the cellular industry came from, way back in the late 70s, early 80s, you only had two carriers, your A and your B side. The B side was the wireline telecoms. The A carriers were much like WISP back then. Craig McCaw got the people banded together. They created the Cellular One franchise name. A lot of the independents joined under that umbrella. They created a brand awareness. They created roaming standards. They created inter-switch operability standards, automatic call delivery. The WISP industry is going to have to move towards that so that wholesale providers like Earthlink could log into a central database, and everybody that's part of this WISP wholesale organization, their information in their network, their small little pocket in the big pie, is made available so that someone can say, okay, I'm going to do your part of the wholesale agreement. Here's your $8 a month, $15 a month, whatever. Do your provisioning, do what you want to do as is published in the database. And that's where the WISP national brand name recognition, in my estimation, needs to be going and take the evolution similar to what the cellular industry did way back when there was only two providers.
As far as getting any sort of funds from the others, whether it be the other carriers, the content companies, the only way I see that happening is in mobile backhaul or things like that. They're too proud to do anything else. They may need us, but they won't acknowledge that unless you're delivering their 100 or 500 meg pipes to the towers. And then as far as the number of WISPs going down, I mean that from saying that the WISPs are going to become weak in the marketplace and die off, but that others will be better at it and rolling up WISPs in the area. I'm not very big WISP, and I touch 13 other WISPs, and I see as those that can better satisfy the needs of the market, their growth is buying up the other ones that are afraid of the regulatory future and or can't do it, and then just sell out to one of the rollers.
If I may add quickly, as I see other people laying out questions. The backhauling is obviously key with this. A Verizon, a Comcast, whoever would offer the end user service would probably be happy to rely on the WISP to cover specific zones if and only if there's a WISP that can provide something at least as good as what they claim to be providing when they are on their own territories. And that will mean that some of the WISP operational aspects will have to go up in terms of quality of predictability of the service. But for WISP to survive, the agility of what you do today will have to remain. That's your challenge. To remain nimble, to be able to save those bots, to be able to do it with ubiquity radios and microwave boxes and hopefully super performant boxes to help you doing this. And that's how you'll be able to survive. And then maybe there'll be some aggregation. That always happens, but we need to remember that what makes you good and to be able to use that to become relevant to those big guys.
Yeah, Brian kind of whacked my point as I was walking up, but I in another life, I worked for an A carrier, and when I first started working for them, they went under the Cellular One brand. That was a true stroke of brilliance because, frankly, those A carriers weren't a whole lot different than a lot of the people in this room when they started out, and frankly, were well behind where a lot of the folks in this room are today. What they did is they had a set of standards that you had to maintain in your business in order to participate, and it was basically marketing. And I think that in order to do some of the things like Dan was talking about, where you need to be able to cover 40 banks, 40 locations, and not the 4 that are in your area. Well, if all 40 are covered under a umbrella organization, I'm not talking about something that controls everything. I'm just saying a lightweight marketing organization. Maybe some WISPA puts together or something like that. It would allow the industry to mature and the companies under that to come up and be able to do some things that individually, even as a group of like WISPA, can't do today.
Okay. Jay?
It's
scared me a little bit with TV white space. With so many devices coming out, allegedly, does that mean I'm turning into more like the Wi-Fi that we're dealing with now, or 900 megahertz that we're dealing with now with smart meters coming out and all these other things? Is that going to eventually, it's going to be 700 megahertz travels, and it travels far, and we're talking 600 megahertz basically. What's your vision for how that spectrum is going to look in 5 to 10 years? Anyone can take that.
Basically, it's a great question, Jeff. And
before I answer it, I just wanted to come back to the first one because it's important. I talked about convergence, and the convergence isn't necessarily, just in your network with the services you provide as a WISP. Convergence also has to do with, that example you gave where you're trying to cover a bunch of different banks, I guess it was it? The idea is that your network is only your network. You need to interconnect with a fiber network. You need to peer with people that are at a core data center. You need to be able to provide services, off net or get to services off net. So that's sort of convergence. Coming back to Jay's point though about TV white space, it's not going to be, in some people's opinion, and it's obviously subject to debate, the same kind of free-for-all that the commons are for Part 15 rules in the UniBand or ISM band. And the reason for that is the database is going to be a factor in how every device behaves in the TV bands. If you're running a low-power consumer device in your home, that Type 2 device, or the device that is essentially tethered, if you will, or runs at a certain power level, is very different than, say, a device that we as WISP might put on the outside of a building and have access to use. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's a step in.
I think a lot of manufacturers too are going to be paying attention to questions like that, Jay. We're here to be a conduit to convey these concerns. None of the manufacturers are going to live in a vacuum. They all know that they're going to have to interoperate with each other, and it's going to happen. And technology will find a way.
Are you going to make the slides available here or on the net, on the web?
I don't know the answer to that question, but I do know they will be made available somehow. Probably on the net.
I think the one question that I asked, I didn't hear the answer is, will Verizon and all the cell phone companies that own towers put TV white space and antennas up there and try to basically do what we do, but to give their customers, if you buy an LTE and it's 15 megabits per second, 2 movies are going to wipe out the amount of bandwidth they give these days. So the customer resistance to that is going to be so high, it seems like they're going to have to do something.
Well, that's a very good question. And one of the interesting moves that's afoot right now is the cable operators. Back in December, I bid on 2 very large projects for both Time Warner and Comcast. Time Warner is building an almost citywide Wi-Fi network. And the cable companies have now commissioned companies to build devices that hang on the messenger wire. They don't even attach to the pole. They have a DOCSIS modem in them. They can power over coax. These radios were spec'd out to have multiple SSIDs. They're Wi-Fi, tiny little footprints that are immediately into the wired network. So they don't need to do wireless hops to backhaul. So you're going to have these small footprints, large capacity. They're going to have multiple SSIDs. So are they going to sign roaming packs when they have, Comcast is doing 17 of their top markets? Large scale. I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands of nodes. They're going to trash the 2.4 band. The radios are dual band, so they may very well trash the 5 gigahertz band. That's going to be a huge pocket of these cellular users. So do the cellular companies go white spaces? Well, how hard is it going to be to get radios in a cell phone that works at 200, 400, 600 megahertz with an efficient antenna? White spaces, I wouldn't guess. Wi-Fi, at some form in a higher frequency where they get efficient antennas, I would say yes. And I think they're probably going to be more opportunistic in the idea of using these networks if they're made available to them. Also, I think you're going to see the cellular carriers, as much as they're going to go kicking and screaming on this, they're going to have to go to a picocell environment, more frequency reuse, so that they can get more capacity. The big disadvantage that they can't do that right now is the infrastructure they need to do that. They don't have a cable plant where they can put a 30 meg DOCSIS modem every 600-800 feet to put a micro cell device on there. that may be another aspect of a future WISP deployment, that you start building fiber networks in municipalities, that at some point, these guys are gonna wanna put all these little fleet power transmitters of frequency reviews and lease space off your fiber network. But you're right in the fact that LTE, while it has the capability of delivering speeds, it doesn't have to do the capacity to deliver the data in mass that the consumer base that they really have will want. So offload is gonna be important. Comcast and Time Warner are already big players that are gonna be doing this in the next couple of years. They're in the middle of their build-outs now. So, but I don't see, from a practical standpoint, to get efficient antennas into a cell phone, white spaces being an offload use like that, I don't anticipate that that would be a big aspect of that.
And real quickly to answer your question, I think the cellular operators are all focused on the incentive auction. They see that as the way to take the spectrum that would be used in TV bands and fold that into their existing technology or the LTE technology. Basically, it's sort of, if you will, instead of calling it TV white spaces, they'll call it cellular, but it would be, you know, the same spectrum. It really has to do with modulation scheme that the spectrum is used for, the rules of the law, the kind of thing that Steve Graham has been on about. So, thanks.
All right, I want to thank everybody for coming today. We're out of time, but we can continue these discussions, of course, on the list. If you don't participate on the member discussion list, please start and ask questions. Let's talk about things so we can shape our own future. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like I need more man. What is that?
I've already seen that a lot of cell phones that go to Wi-Fi first.
That's